Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started now. Again, this is Bob Cruz with Checkpoint Technologies. I want to thank all of you for joining us for today's webinar, Test Automation Forensics Audit. I'm very proud to let you know that we have Brian White, Dean Carvin, and myself joining you today to present this information. So Brian and Dean, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to the group. So Brian, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. Hi, I'm Brian White, and I have been doing software quality assurance testing since 1997, so yeah, 18 years, I guess. And I've been working in test automation for just over 8 years, and I've had the great opportunity to speak at some different conferences like HP Discover, QAI, that sort of thing. And that is me in a nutshell.
So I am Dean Carvin. Thanks for joining me. I am the Director of Professional Services with Checkpoint Technologies. I've been using HP test automation, test management tools for about 16 years now. And I started my career in test automation, and it's kind of a passion of mine. I've also spoken at a number of conferences and also regularly do mentoring, consulting, and training with our customers.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Dean. And again, my name is Bob Cruz. I'm president and co-founder of Checkpoint Technologies. I've been in IT for about almost 28 years now. Started off as an IBM DB2 COBOL programmer many, many years ago. And then in the 90s, when all of a sudden we started seeing quality assurance and quality control start to get so much more respect, I ended up developing a passion for software testing. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. One of the big things I want to emphasize is please ask any questions. This is a webinar, but please feel free to ask any questions during the webinar. So a little bit about Checkpoint Technologies. We were incorporated in January of 2003. Our sole focus is on quality assurance and quality control in the specific areas of functional, performance, and application security validation. So we provide a significant amount of services, and we also partner with those organizations that we feel create the best of breed solutions specifically for software testing. So we started off actually as a Mercury Interactive partner and then transitioned over to Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. So we are a software gold partner with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and we are also an authorized software support partner and certified training. We are also partners with Mobile Labs, Zephyr, and Turnkey Solutions that make some excellent leading-edge solutions. And we are affiliated with QAI, Quality Assurance Institute, as a training partner. So some of the services that we at Checkpoint Technologies provide include staff augmentation. So if you ever need somebody, some expert resources to come on site to assist with manual testing, test automation, regression testing, performance testing, etc., that's something we do for several of our clients. We also provide consulting, such as our forensic audit, which we'll be discussing, outsourcing, training, and mentoring. So these are just some of the services that we at Checkpoint Technologies provide. So I mentioned just a moment ago to ask questions, as many as you'd like, and you'll notice that in the control bar, there is an area where you can ask questions, so please feel free to do that. Just type away. We're going to do our best to get questions answered during the webinar and after the webinar. Any questions that we do not ask, then we will certainly get to them within the next week or so and get those out to all recipients. So again, a little bit about the agenda we're going to cover during today's webinar. We will be talking about some real-life scenarios, why you need a test automation forensics audit, and we'll explain naturally in more detail what a test automation forensics audit is. So who performs the audit, what are the different types of levels for the test automation forensics audit that you can take, and then the test automation forensics audit report. So we'll explain in detail the information provided in the reports, and we will also dive into how a test automation forensics audit will assist you. And then naturally there will be a Q&A at the end of this, but please feel free to ask any questions via the questions bar in the control panel. So now, without any further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Brian White and Dean Carvin. Brian, take it away, sir.
Okay, thanks, Bob. All right, so let's go ahead and start the presentation. We're going to start with an example. We're going to use as a stand-in for the customer application, we're going to use the sample Mercury Web Tours application that comes with HP Unified Functional Test or Quick Test Professional. Let's just say, again, this is the stand-in for the customer application, let's just say that you have 600 test cases, 600 automated test cases have been written. One of those tests against this particular application is going to check departing cities and arriving cities to make sure that when you select your departing and arriving cities, that when you navigate to the book a flight page, that that combination matches the combination that you picked. Okay, you've written a test case for that, you've automated it, you've got your code all in place, and you execute your automated test case, and here are the results. You can see there's a lot of green, a lot of passes, not a failure in sight. Looks pretty good, right? That's great. We ran our test, no failures, all passes, everything's going great. Here's the script or the important piece of the script that just ran that test for creating and adding a departure and arrival city and then checking to make sure that combination showed up later on in book a flight. Can you see what's wrong with this script? What I would like you to do is, if you want to just take a second, you can type in the GoToMeeting control question box if you can see what's wrong with this script. I'll just give you a couple of seconds, but won't get hung up here too long. I can tell you that there is something wrong with it. Okay, so here is what the problem is with this script. Right at the end of the select statement, I don't know how familiar any of you folks are with a select statement, but just to give you a quick breakdown, a select statement takes an expected value and then checks that expected value against an actual value. So the select statement has all of those expected values of combining the departure city with the arrival city, and those are all set as conditions in that select statement. Again, when you pull that combination from the book of flight, you compare it there in the select statement, and if the select statement finds, say, Acapulco to Paris, then it's going to do, in this case, report a pass underneath there. At the end, where that oval is, you will notice that the statement ends, but there is part of a select statement that's called a case else statement. That says if none of those combinations, if none of the expected values are found, then do this. In this case, we would want to report a failure and say we did not find your departure and arrival city combination on the book a flight page. But there isn't one there. A select statement will run, and in this case, because there's no else statement, if somebody misspelled Acapulco, none of those combinations would be found on the book a flight page, and your script would move on, and you would never see any indication that it had failed to find the combination because there's no else statement. So again, imagine you have 600 automated test cases, you get your results back, and you don't see a failure, you see a bunch of passes. How are you going to know what happened with that test? And so we're going to actually spend a little bit of time right now sharing some real-life scenarios that we've experienced that demonstrate the importance of a test automation forensics audit. That example that I just gave is actually my real-life scenario. I worked with a customer. They had literally hundreds of automated test cases. None of their select statements had any else cases. And so they could have run all those select statements, and there could have been errors, and they would never have known. So that is a place where they really needed to have their test automation audited. Bob, our moderator, also has a story. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So I once provided some training for an organization on test automation, and I had a group from one specific division of the organization. It was a very large retail company. And on my last day of training there, the QA manager actually came in and said, Bob, we have a serious problem. Another group of ours had created numerous automated tests. They've been running them for the past couple of months, all passing, everything fine. We were all happy. And we just realized today that not a single one of those tests actually did any true validation. So in other words, they were doing nothing more than navigating through the application, entering data, but they had no checkpoint, nothing that compared expected results to actual results. So as you can imagine, that was a real problem. Something which could have easily been found if just somebody with a bit more expertise had gone through to see that they were missing checkpoints, and or that the checkpoints they did have in were not coded correctly. And Dean, I know you have a real-life story to share as well.
I do, Bob, and this was pretty interesting. This was actually during an automation assessment with a client maybe about a year ago. And one of the big concerns, in this case, they were using an off-site team for their automation. And one of the biggest concerns was the tests were taking very long to run, and they really couldn't figure out why. They couldn't figure out what common problem there was. Was it their infrastructure? Was it their automated test? Was it the application? So that was just one of the points they wanted us to figure out. So part of the assessment was looking at the test results. And what we found were quite a few test results that would run for 4 hours or more. But when we look at the results, the very first step in the result failed. And that first step was actually invoking the application. So in many cases, the application never even opened up. And the test would continue running every step, trying to run every single step, even though there was no application to run against. And the other problem was there was no way in their test results to really get an idea of what was occurring. It was just all these failures, but they really didn't see what was happening. But what was happening, and we found out by running a test, is the application never opened up. So the problem was they didn't have any way of killing a test if there was some critical failure that occurred, and also the reporting wasn't robust enough and didn't have any kind of objective evidence included in the report to show here's what happened during the test run. So those are some really big wins, just a couple ideas that really provided value for this organization.
That's great. Thank you, Dean. So now we're going to actually do a poll. Dean, Brian, and I have shared with you some real-life scenarios. So we'd like to ask the audience, have you ever thought your automation framework and scripts were running properly only to find out at a later date that they actually weren't? So if you would, you'll see the poll questions here. If you could answer never, occasionally, several times. And we'll give you a minute to respond. I will spare everybody my singing the Jeopardy theme while we do this. All right, fantastic. So out of our entire audience, 85% actually responded with either occasionally or several times. And to break that down further, 60% have indicated occasionally and 25% several times. But I'm sure that everybody understands the fact that it only needs to occur once in order to cause your organization significant loss of revenue or negative publicity if there is something wrong with your application. So thank you very much for participating in that poll. Brian and Dean, what do you think of those results?
I think that is pretty much as expected.
Yeah, it's not surprising. Any company who's relying on automation, they're going to find challenges. The big question is, how are they handling those challenges? What's their mitigation to get these things fixed and everything working properly? So with that, let's take a look at why your organization would consider a test automation forensics audit. So first of all, of course, your organization has to rely on automation. Automation is in place. You understand it is critical for your organization to test thoroughly, test quickly, and have robust results so that you know what you're putting out there in production meets your requirements and your customers' requirements as well. So there's a couple different scenarios. So that automation can be produced on-site with local resources, your resources developing the automation, or you may have automation being developed by an off-site contract on a contractual basis. So either way, the question is how is that automation being tested itself? Okay. So if you, in the case of an off-site team, you may or may not have expertise in-house to verify or check the automation that's being delivered. If you don't, then you certainly need a way to do that. It's great if you could 100% rely on a contractor to develop everything perfectly, but human nature is it's not going to be perfect. So a follow-up, looking at the code level, looking at what's being delivered, looking at the test results, what's being delivered, the reporting is very, very important. If you have experts in-house that can do that, that are qualified to do that, do they really have the time to do that? Everyone's bandwidth these days is very, very tight. No one has 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week to keep checking what's being delivered. They have other things to do. They probably are working on their own automation. So ask them and then look behind, kind of follow behind somebody to make sure everything's produced properly. It can be a stretch. The other thing you want to look at is, as far as what's happening in your automation, do the results of the automated test runs match up with what's actually happening in production? Are you seeing failures in production for those tests or those scripts that really should be covering those areas? Okay, everything works in the scripts like we saw in Brian's example, but in reality, things are breaking that should not be breaking, that supposedly had been tested. During the execution, is it just taking too long? What's taking long? Is the code redundant? Are there calls being made that are just unnecessary? Is there a lot of overhead? Data being managed well? Things like that. And what about the reporting? When you do have a failure, it's easy to look at the reporting and truly understand what is happening in the test run, whether it's failed cases or past results. So the reporting is also very, very important when it comes to automation deliverables. So some considerations, you got to consider who's watching the hen house. So one thing is typically we don't have developers testing their own code. I mean, that's kind of the idea of having separation of duties. You have developers, you have testers testing, you have test automation developing code to test the developer's code. Okay, so who's checking that code that the automation engineers are developing? So they're the experts. So who's checking their code? How do you know there aren't bugs in the automation code? So you may have a lot of green, you may have some failures. Are you getting false failures? Are you getting false positives? You don't know until you look at the code and make sure it's correct, it's proper. Who's interpreting the test results? You know, lots of times we all know, and if you've been using automation, that not every failure is a defect of the application. It could be synchronization, meaning that the test is running faster than the application can keep up, so it kind of just moves too fast and then creates errors. Not a functional problem, it's a performance problem possibly. Are there other issues that are happening? So the failures, are they just a symptom of what's currently happening? That's what we have to look into. So are the test results clean and robust enough? What about a sign-off process? Whether you have internal automation engineers or external automation engineers, is there a sign-off process in place? So like code reviews, peer reviews for code reviews, or do you have a party looking at the code to make sure all is well? So those are some considerations you want to think about. So what does the automation team know what to automate? How do they know what to automate? So an automation person or team works from some source materials, and those source materials can be manual tests, they can be requirements, they can be user stories, okay? Whatever it happens to be, how do we know those are robust enough? Because many times, I tell you, as a consultant, we go into a lot of places. It's very rare to find a manual test case, what they call a detailed manual test case, truly written to the point where an automation engineer who is not a subject matter expert on the application come in and even just take that manual test and walk through it manually, let alone create the automation for it. Because lots of times we see that a test step will say, run this process. Okay, what's that process? Well, how do you do that process? So there could be 10, 20 steps in that process. And we'll ask a SME and they'll say, well, here's what you do, this, this, and this. But it's not documented. So how well are they documented? Has there been some interpretation from that manual test to the automated test, and there's some interpretation that's wrong? Okay, so the manual test may not be doing what that manual, or the automated test isn't doing what the manual test intended it to do. All right. What about if the source material is a requirement? If you look at a requirement, they're much more vague than a user story or a test case. So there's much more interpretation that would be involved there. So as you know, a requirement can result in numerous test cases to test that requirement. If it's up to an automation engineer who's not a subject matter expert to interpret those requirements and create tests, are they truly testing what the requirement intends for it to test? Okay. And last but certainly least is if you're just throwing the application at an automation team, and don't laugh at this because it happens. Here's the application, here's some overall processes, create a smoke test, create some regression tests for this, here's some data that you can use, and go at it. Well, that's pretty painful. In that case, you're almost asking for it. There's going to be a lot of holes in the automation. So hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully we have some strong source material to work from. And we'll check those. What we'll do, and we'll get into this in just a minute, but we'll compare those source materials to what's actually being delivered in the automation. That's part of the automation forensics audit.
So Dean, you've seen that at customers as well, right? Where they're building their automation straight from the application?
Yes, at least they start there until they realize it's just not working. Then they have to go back to the drawing board. And they'll come to Checkpoint Technologies and say, okay, we need some help here, what's going on? And the first thing is, where's your source material? Let's look at your source material, make sure it's clean, well developed, the data sets are there, the expected results are there, validation, things like that. And if that can't be produced very easily, then that's probably where we would want to start with the audit to get that synced up with the automation. So that does happen. And so generally, you don't know what you don't know. Okay, so in some cases, the automation engineers aren't at the point where they look at the manual test or evaluate, is the term I'm trying to get, evaluate the manual test to see what should be automated, what shouldn't be automated. They just said, here, automate these tests. Well, sometimes you find that there are some manual tests that just need to stay automated or manual. So if you're coming across, maybe you have a handful of automated test scripts that are just not running properly. There's a lot of maintenance involved. They're prone to error for numerous reasons. Very slow processes is trying to check and just can't get synced up with the application, things like that. You may want to keep those manual. Those are some things we could recommend possibly. Some of your manual tests could inversely be automated, whereas they're constantly or they're currently manual. We could identify those as well. What functionality is being automated? In other words, how's the coverage compared to your manual test, your whole suite of testing that you do, say for regression testing? What percentage of automation is covering your manual test suite or your automated or your regression suite? So if you're stuck at maybe 30, 40, even 50%, and you can't get beyond maintenance now, and you're stuck on maintenance, there's reasons for that. We can help you get beyond that 40, 50% and and move it to the 70 or 80% standard, which your goal should be for your automation percentage of test automated. What's being validated? Okay, in other words, looking at your manual test, making sure the validation is proper compared to your source material. In this case, we'll just talk about manual tests or user stories. So is the validation correct? Sometimes there's some interpretation. We will make sure that interpretation is correct. When it comes to the code, is it coded correctly? Is it maintainable, and is it scalable? So when it comes to validation, some of the code could be it could be two pass conditions. If this equals this, then pass, else pass. We've seen that before too. It's a copy-paste error, and it wasn't changed to a fail. Those are things that could happen. Is it maintainable? So if you're using, say, a framework or some methodology like that, is the framework or the scripts maintainable? Or is it just a pain, you're bogged down in maintenance because there's a lot of redundant code, a lot of sloppy code, it's hard to figure out how to maintain it. And then again, is it scalable? Can you add additional processes for your application in your automation easily without having a whole other automation project to pull it in? So is it maintainable? Is it scalable? Is it correct?
And Dean, those are all great points. I know that in the 18 years that I've been involved in test automation, I can tell you that the #1 hindrance for organizations in realizing ROI, the most common, is clearly that they either automate test, which should remain manual, or they don't automate those that are good candidates for automation. They leave them manual when really it's a regression test, it's tedious, etc. So great list. Thank you for sharing that.
Great. Okay.
And that's where I'm sorry. Just a quick question. That's one of the parts that an automation forensics audit can do, is look at those manual tests and make sure what's being automated should be automated. So back to you, Brian.
Sure. No, thanks, Dean. So that really begs the question, who tests the testers? That, as you can see, that creating test automation is a development activity. You're writing code that is going to automate manual tests. So your SQA team is testing your application, and by default, by association, is testing your developer's code. You don't have your software developers testing their own code. It's just bad practice. But when you have your automation team, either your in-house automation team, maybe you've gone off-site and you've had an off-site team build your automation, but in any case, when your automation team builds the automation, almost every single organization I've ever interacted with, worked with, always those automation developers end up testing their own code, and not that it's in their hands. SQA doesn't test their code. So in essence, developers are testing their own code, and that is what we can do. That is what a test automation forensics audit provides. It provides experts who are objective, who lack a conflict of interest, who are independent, unbiased, who we can be your SQA team for the test automation. And that's so much of what can make sure that all of those items that Dean just listed are taken care of, are covered, that you make sure that you have good code, that the validation points are good, that it's efficient, that it's scalable, all of that. And that is what we provide as automation experts. Also, I think that all of you know that doing test automation is an essential part of software quality assurance testing, right? If you're not automating manual testing, if you're only doing manual testing and your competition is automating their testing, they're going to be quicker to market, they're going to have more coverage, they're going to be able to deliver their products faster, so it's hard to keep up. So test automation is essential. And computers are incredibly fast, incredibly accurate, and incredibly stupid. and people are incredibly slow, incredibly inaccurate. I'm sorry about that, but we are. But we are incredibly brilliant. Test automation combines computers with people so that we can use our judgment, so that we can build good manual tests, so that we can write code, and then the test automation runs and it enters everything, right? It doesn't ever fat finger a key. So it's always accurate. It's faster than we are. It never needs a cup of coffee. It'll work all weekend. It doesn't care. It's fine with that. And so test automation is a powerful tool, but you have to make sure your test automation is doing what you need it to do. So test automation tools, in case you're wondering, what tools do we audit? We do the HP tools, the Unified Functional Test and Quick Test Professional, as well as the HP LeanFT tool, and we can also run audits with Selenium. And so with that, I will hand it back to you, Dean.
Thank you, Brian. So what will our auditors do? What we'll do is verify, again, that your automation does what it's supposed to do. And we'll look at three general parts. One, are the steps the same? Are the steps correct? Are they walking through the automation the way the manual tests state to do? Or is it taking shortcuts that could impact the actual results? So that's important, getting through the application in the proper way that a user would do without taking shortcuts. Is the validation correct? So if you have a number of sets of data that you need to run through, is the validation checking the right data, the right state of the application at the right parts, at the right times during the execution? And what about the data? We all know data is critical in all forms of testing. Automation just kind of multiplies that because it can go through reams and reams of data. We know that very often the test documentation cannot state use this exact piece of data. Lots of times the data is used up during the test. So where is the source data coming from? Is it being created by the automation? Is it being provided via queries from a production environment possibly? So we want to make sure that whereas the exact data may not be able to be used, we want to make sure the types of data are being used properly because the data can control the results of the test. You might get false failures or false pass conditions just because the wrong data types even are being utilized. So what else will we do? We'll drill down as deep as we have to go, all right? We'll also look at, is the code commented? So we'll also look at best practices. You may ask yourself, who cares about comments? Who cares if the variable is declared? It doesn't impact the way the test runs. It doesn't speed it up, slow it down, anything. Well, you're right. But consider the possibility of whoever's developing these automated tests or the framework leaving the organization or the contracting company, ending the project. Who's then going to have the automation to continually maintain, develop new functionality, execute, and look at the test results, analyze test results? If there's no comments, it's going to be very, very challenging to understand what is actually going on in the automation. And beyond the comments themselves, even a full-blown document as to what exactly is happening. So in the case of a framework, what parts go together? Where's the communication? Where are the calls? How's the data being managed? What's happening when my application creates a piece of data, an order number? Where does it go? What's it do? How's the framework deal with that? So those are all important things to have commented inside the code and as a separate document as well. Also, the other kind of a technical part is, what about memory? So we all understand that an application can have memory leaks. Automation can have memory leaks as well. There are objects created, there are classes created, there's all kinds of things going on, and if they're not closed out and killed at the proper time, that memory can start eating up the resources on the machine it's running on, and we'll just make sure that all those proper best practices are in place. And there's a number of others we can talk about too, but you get the idea. We'll look and make sure it should be written so that somebody coming behind can maintain it and understand it. So we'll even look at the logic. We'll look at the validation points. We'll see if it's optimized. So when it comes to logic, look at the example that Brian had. Without digging into the logic, he would have never found that missing case else statement. So you have to dig down into the code. Another thing that we've come across a number of times are looping statements, a for next statement, a do while statement, things like that could result in an endless loop, and depending on the conditions going into it. We'll make sure that cannot occur. Things like that can just kill your automation. We'll make sure it's optimized as far as efficiency. Is there a lot of redundant code? Are there areas of the automation that can be shared so that can reduce maintenance as well? We'll check the logic paths, making sure the calls are correct. And then also, we'll verify the artifacts are organized properly. And one of the keys is just making sure it's being backed up, making sure it's on a shared location somewhere, things like that, making sure it's organized so everyone understands where all the artifacts are. Okay, so they're all important parts of an automation solution. So that being said, these are the things we do. What about the things we do not include during the automation forensic audit? We will not correct the issues that we find. We will dig down, we will research, we'll find everything, and we'll document everything that's found, but we won't go in and correct the issues that we find. We won't execute your whole regression suite and report on the execution, whether it passed or failed, and issues, things like that. We'll likely execute some tests as required as we do our research, but we won't execute a large suite of tests. Neither will we train or mentor the automation resources. There's a reason for this. You may ask yourself, well, while you're there, why not just fix everything? Well, the idea, and Brian brought this up, is that we want to maintain our objectivity. Okay, so the minute we start touching the code and start training the automation engineers on how to do things properly, we begin to take ownership of that code, and there goes the objectivity. So we want to make sure when we come in, we're not influenced and we're objective, and we just do the part of what the audit calls for.
And Dean, if I could interject here, these are things that we at Checkpoint Technologies definitely have the expertise to provide. So if you wanted to engage our team to either concurrently or as a follow-on engagement, correct the issues, execute some of the tests, report on the execution results, as well as educate your team, we can certainly do that. But it would be a devoted team during the forensic auditing process that would be focused on performing the engagement.
Very good point, Bob. Thanks for mentioning that.
Okay, so at this point, we should discuss what level of audit do you need. There are different levels of a forensics audit that you may want to make use of. If you have a framework and all of the associated tests, and you want us to come in and you want us to look at all of that, we can do that. And that is called our AI level, or our Automation Intelligence level audit. And that just includes everything: framework, associated tests, organization, all of it, best practices, and we will come in and we will look at your entire framework and tests. We also have our FI level, our Framework Intelligence level audit. In that case, we can look at just the framework. We can, if you feel good about your test, but you're wondering whether the framework is constructed correctly, whether calls are being made, whether the flow is correct, we can come in, we can take a look at that. So that would be our FI level. Then there's the RI level, our Regression Intelligence level, and that, if you have a framework but you are confident in your framework and you just want us to look at your automated tests, we can audit your automated tests. And we can look at your full test suite, or we can look at a sample of your test suite. So if you feel like if you have 600 test cases and you would like to have us come in and you would like us to look at a sample of, say, 100 of those test cases, and then you'll just extrapolate out, your audit can do that. So that is up to you. That's something that you get to decide. You get to figure out how that's going to work best for you. And then reporting, right? The forensics audit results, that is the thing that our auditors provide so that you know what we found, and then you can decide what you want to do with that information. So when we get in, we will report your test automation defects. For instance, we could go in and we could say, you know, your manual test case says to go in and it says to pair Acapulco with New York, but there is no automated test case that pairs Acapulco with New York. We would report that as a defect. We could tell you that results from the automated test, right, that oh, well, we got some passes here in the automated test, but when we looked at the manual test results, there weren't passes there, or there were failures in the manual tests, and they're passing the automated test. So that's something off there. And we can look at all that, and we will. And then we'll report that back to you in the report so that you can do with it as you see fit.
And Brian, also, I just wanted to congratulate you on using the word non-dichotomous in a sentence. Well done. Well played, sir.
Thank you very much, Bob. Appreciate that. And we will, your results report will talk about best practices compliance. It will tell you, things like if the code isn't commented, or if it's commented in a way that doesn't really give a clear indication of what your scripts are doing, and it'll, we'll let you know that you're missing case else statements, or that your for loop is too long, or that your while loop never ends, or that we'll let you know that you're not cleaning, that the scripts don't clean up memory, that they don't close database connections, that sort of thing. We will also let you know about framework efficiencies. If you either get the FI or the AI level audit, we'll let you know your framework, it follows a path that doesn't actually pull in all of the tests, or the flow is incorrect, or it's not end-to-end, and you wanted it to be end-to-end, and we can do that too. And your report will tell you that as well. So when we get done with our audit, we will provide you with this report, and then you can take it from there, do what you need to do, and get things cleaned up. So hopefully by now, this slide it has become self-evident. Hopefully you understand that if you're using test automation, and if, for instance, maybe you have some on-site folks, right? You have a team right there in-house that's building automation, but maybe they don't have time to run extensive testing. We could come in. We could be your auditors for your in-house automation. Let's say that let's say you're having an off-site team build your automation. We could come in and we could audit that as well. What it comes down to is that we can give you peace of mind that your testing, that your automated testing is doing everything it needs to do. And again, we can come in once, we could come in twice, we could come in once a year, we could come in monthly. We can work that out with you so that it serves you best, and so that you're getting everything that you need from your audit. You know that your test automation is working as it should.
Hey, Brian, if you have just a minute, I have a great question from the audience.
Yeah.
So is this a good time? All right, great.
Yes, absolutely.
So great question. It appears that our audit compares automated tests with manual test cases. Does your audit comprehend cases where there is not a one-to-one correspondence between automated and manual test? As you, Dean, and I all know, many times there are automated tests that cover separate tests.
Yes, and absolutely, that is part of the audit, and that is when we look at an engagement with that customer, we would look at that and we would say, okay, so these 5 manual tests, these 10 manual tests are all being covered by this automated tests, and we would map that back and forth. So absolutely, that is absolutely something that could be part of the audit. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one. It could be one-to-many or many-to-one, whichever way works. Hope that answers the question. Great. Okay.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. So some real-world success stories where audits have helped. In Rizzo, we went in and, as you can see, they had automation in place, but there were some issues. And so when the audit or after the audit, they were able to increase their what they could or decrease their maintenance by 45%, half, right? So half of the tests that they were maintaining prior to this, they didn't have to afterwards. And optimization, right? They saw a huge increase in how quickly their tests ran, so they can run more cycles, they can build more testing that they know that their automated testing is going to be faster and easier to use going forward. Again, you can see in Fortune 500 retail company, right? And so here you can see that they're finding defects that they weren't finding before the audit. If nothing else, that by itself is huge value, huge benefit, because those, if nothing else, those defects go out and they're in your application and they cost you money. You absolutely know it. So we have some real life success stories. There's a couple of them there. And just keep in mind that an audit allows us to test your testers. Everybody needs an editor. Even J.K. Rowling and Ernest Hemingway had editors. Let us be your editors for your test automation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Dean. So now we're going to open it up for Q&A. Please feel free to ask whatever questions you'd like. We've got a little bit over 10 minutes remaining, so we'll field what questions we can. Any that we don't get to, we will be responding via file and email all the questions and the answers to you. So one of the questions, and Dean, I'm going to throw this out to you, is how long does an audit, a forensic audit, take?
Well, that's actually kind of a tough question, Bob. It really depends on how much automation you have in place. Depends on the level of audit that you request. Whether we're looking at the framework and your tests, or just looking at your tests, or we're looking at all 100% of your tests or sampling of your tests. But we would help you scope that out. We would take a look at what your needs are, and then convert you and find out what you want. Price range, well, you know, all affects everything, but what level of detail do you want the audit to be? And we'll get an idea before we begin the audit. Here's how many hours it's going to take. But it's really on a case-by-case basis.
Great point, and that was a great point with, you know, a lot of it just depends on the time you have available, the time your team has available, and the budget that you have, absolutely. Another question, and I'll actually field this one. I have my test automation team consisting of FTEs. I also hire third-party vendors to write the test scripts for our test. And my FTE, so that's full-time engineer, test automation team members serve in this forensic auditing role? What do they need to learn? So you know, I'm not going to say that they cannot, but one of the things that I would like you to consider is that in regard to this forensic audit process, we are truly getting down in the weeds, if you will. If we start looking at automated tests, we're getting down at the code level. So, Brian, early during the introductions, how many years have you had in test automation?
Over 8. Actually.
Over 8. And Dean, you've got well over 15, correct?
That's, yeah, about double Brian's years. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah. And I have 18 years. So, as you can see, we would only have the most senior automation experts do a test automation forensic audit. So I hope that answered that question. As far as what you need to learn, there's a lot that you can learn. A lot of it is a certain personality trait in the sense that you've got to pay close attention to detail, because sometimes if your automated tests are not doing what they should, it could be as something as simple as somebody inserted a comma or a period in the code where they did not have, or they have a space where it doesn't belong. So another question, and Brian, I'm going to throw this one out to you, sir. Do the auditors need to be at location on the client site, or can they do this remotely?
You know, the auditors absolutely can do it remotely, which is as long as the customer has everything set up so that the auditors can access the application and their environment and their test automation. Absolutely, this can happen remotely. They can also be on site, and so fortunately, that's one of the things that that we can work out with the customer. If that helps, I hope.
Fantastic, great. And Dean, I'll throw this one out to you. When you say framework, what exactly does that mean? That's a great question.
That is a great question. And a framework, I almost hate to use the term, Bob, because it's so overly used. But there is no one framework alike. So the idea of a framework is you have kind of an automation structure that your automation tests actually run through. And actually just looked at another one this morning, Bob, from another customer, and it's all data-driven, just a number of Excel files. All the tests are in Excel. All the execution is controlled by Excel, and then it runs through a framework, starting with a driver script, and it makes decisions based on what's in that Excel file. So a framework generally extrapolates out the code from the tests in a lot of ways. So the back-end code structure called the framework, the back-end framework. Then the front end is, okay, how do we automate tests using that framework? And a lot of times, the most common structure is Excel to actually really contains the automation. So that's a great question, but generally it separates the data and the testing from the actual code itself.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Dean. Here's another question, and I'll actually field this one. Do you also provide any kind of process audit to ensure the approach is correct? We absolutely do. We actually provide a QA and QC, quality control process audit, where we will take a look at an organization's test environment, production environment, their testing processes, including what solutions they're utilize, if any. If they desire, we can also do a skill assessment of their team in not only expertise on any specific solutions, but in software testing 101. So by that I mean, are they strong at writing effective test cases, test planning? Do they understand what traceability is? Do they understand what the different classes are in regard to what they're testing? So we definitely can provide, and that would be based upon not only the test objectives of your organization, but also just what it is that you're trying to accomplish in the time frame that you're trying to accomplish it. And our assessment includes a roadmap which would outline our findings, recommendations, and then some ideas on how to help your organization get to where they want to be in the time frame they have in mind. So thank you very much for that question. Brian, I'm going to throw this out to you, and Dean, feel free to pipe in on this one as well. Do you expect the test to be written in a certain way for you to do an audit?
Well, what we would need, and again, as Dean said earlier, we could certainly do an audit based on requirements or based on a software design document or something like that. It just changes the amount of time that it might take, so that because we would have to do the interpretation. If tests are written with actions and expected results, that is going to be the best possible approach. But if you're writing them in Excel, if you have them in, say, Quality Center or Zephyr or some other tool, that's fine. But what is important is to have test cases that have actions and expected results. Dean, what do you think about that?
It's pretty much what I would say. Test documentation comes in a number of forms. Word, Excel, test management tool you're utilizing in your company, it doesn't matter. As long as we can take a look at it and do a nice comparison to what's actually being automated.
Great, great. Another question, do you use any particular tools for forensic auditing? You know, just my thoughts on that, and Brian and Dean, please feel free to share your thoughts. But to be quite honest with you, in regard to the forensic audit, no, we don't use any specific tools. We just roll up our sleeves and get right down into looking at your framework and your automated test in the solutions or tools that your organization uses. So as Brian and Dean have mentioned a number of times, whether it's Selenium or LeanFT or UFT, it really depends on the solutions that your organization uses. Dean and Brian, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Bob, I would. It's not about tools. It's really just about experience. Because many times we'll come into an organization where they'll have kind of what is considered a mature automation process or in place, but they can't figure things out because maybe they're developers, maybe they understand development, but not testing. Testing is a whole different animal, and understanding how to analyze test results and things like that. So it's a whole experience that kind of goes in behind the test audit. It's not tools based. We don't use tools to analyze. It's just experience that really goes into that.
I would absolutely concur. It is the experience that comes in and lets us know where to go, what to look for, and then adapt based on what we find when we start looking at the tests and code and the process. So yeah, I would absolutely concur with that.
Great, great. Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Brian. The last question for today, because we are certainly respectful of your time and how busy all of you are. Please feel free to continue entering questions, and we will do our best to get back to them even when the webinar is over. So last question, what kind of planning do we, the client, need to do for a forensic audit? Brian, Dean, how would you answer that?
Yeah, the planning, we would help you with that in the beginning, making sure we have the right resources in place, and those include the source materials for the test, the automation engineers that created the automation, also subject matter experts. So that's some of the planning we would have to do, just make sure things are scheduled, resources are available for when we come in and start the audit.
Yeah, and I would, only thing I might add to that is just to make sure that all of the accesses have been set up so that we can get to your test cases, so that we can get to your application, so we can get to your manual as well as automated tests. So we want to make sure that that was all set up. If there were, you know, if you use virtual machines, we'll make sure that those are configured. And so yeah, just making sure environments are set up, that SMEs are lined up, that we have, you know, that those items that allow us to look at and exercise your test automation are in place.
Fantastic. And Brian, if you could do me a big favor and just go back one more slide.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to share with everybody that we actually do have an upcoming webinar, testing in a CIT, continuous integration test environment, and that's going to be on December 9th from noon, 1 o'clock. And Brian, if I'm not mistaken, you're the presenter for that one as well, am I correct?
That is me, Bob, absolutely.
Outstanding. Yeah. So if those of you on our webinar today are able to join us for that one on Wednesday, December 9th, we would absolutely appreciate it. And thank you so much for all of the different questions. I do want to thank you very much for joining us today. And you can certainly go to the next slide there, Brian. And see, the reason we kept this, me asking Brian to go back and forward, we really had this down smoothly, and then we thought, you know, if we're that smooth, Brian, people are going to think this is a recorded webinar. So we wanted everybody to see, that this truly is a live webinar, and you have Curly, Larry, and Mo joining you today. So again, I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us today. We hope that you learned some good, valuable information. Please feel free to contact us with any questions. We would love to discuss it with you further. And I certainly hope that those of you that are joining us from within the United States, I hope you have a very safe and happy Thanksgiving, you and your families, next week. So that's it. There will be a poll at the end. Please take that, because we are always looking to improve our webinars. And as I mentioned a moment ago, for another minute or two, you can certainly submit more questions. Thank you.